The Cooler Master MasterBox NR400, with its minimalistic look and mesh front, has potential to be my new favorite case. But before I start the overview, if you liked the video, please subscribe and click that bell icon. It helps a lot. The NR400 is a Micro ATX case and has a bigger brother in the NR600. Both the NR400 and the NR600 have two SKUs, one with an optical disc drive and one without. The NR400 I have does have the optical disc drive, or the ODD, and should run you around $60 US. The NR400 comes with a small bag with all the screws and fittings you'll need, as well as a user guide. The dimensions of the NR400 are 41 centimeters high by 21 centimeters wide by 41 centimeters deep and weighs 5.7 kilos. The front panel is a fine black metal mesh. The front panel also has a removable 5¼ inch drive bay cover. The front panel can be easily removed by pulling the bottom of the front panel away from the chassis. Taking a closer look at the front panel, we see that there is no thin foam behind the metal mesh, so the front panel is relying on the fine metal mesh as its dust filter. The case I/O is located on the top of the case and consists of two USB 3.0 ports, a single 4-pole headset port for both audio out and microphone, and the power and reset buttons. The top of the case also has a 280mm magnetic dust filter. At the rear of the case, we see the rear I/O panel and tooling for one 120mm exhaust fan that can be adjusted to suit different cooling configurations. There are also 4 expansion slots, all with reusable covers. And finally, the power supply location. For the bottom of the case, there are 4 plastic feet. The feet have rubber pads to help stop the case from sliding around. The feet allow for 12mm of ventilation. The bottom also has a removable dust filter for the power supply, but this dust filter can only be accessed by lifting or tilting the case. To remove the right side panel, you need to undo the 2 captive thumb screws at the back of the case, then slide the panel back and lift it away. The right side panel is steel and feels quite rigid thanks to the large guide rails. The left side panel is tempered glass. To remove the left side panel is similar to the right side panel. Undo the 2 captive thumb screws at the rear, then slide the panel back and lift it away. I do like this method of fastening the tempered glass panel to the chassis with the guide rails along the top and bottom of the glass panel. However, I do see a possible issue with this method, and that is the adhesive holding the guide rails to the panel and if it will hold up over time. The lower metal panel covering the basement is riveted in, so you can only access the basement from the right side of the case. Looking at the inside of the case, as I just mentioned, there is a basement. The shroud has tooling for 2 2.5 inch drives and also has 2 good sized cutouts for cables. The NR400 supports Mini ITX and Micro ATX motherboards. The motherboard tray has 5 cutouts, 4 of which are for running cables, and 2 of these cutouts have grommets. The maximum GPU length is 345mm, but that will be cut down if you go with a front-mounted radiator. The max CPU cooler height is 165mm. As I said before, there are 2 versions of the NR400. This one that supports an optical disc drive and the other one does not. Now thankfully, the 4¼ inch bay is easily removable by unscrewing 4 screws. 3 are located on the front and 1 is located on the left side. Now looking at the back side of the motherboard tray, there is 22mm given for cables, and we see tooling for 2 more 2.5 inch drives. In the basement there is a 3-bay drive cage for 3.5 inch drives. This drive cage can be moved or removed with 1 screw. You can have 2 drives installed into the cage and 1 more can be installed on top of the cage. With the drive cage at its backmost position, will allow for a 140mm power supply. With the drive cage at its frontmost position, gives up to 220mm for the power supply. And removing the drive cage gives up to 355mm for the power supply and all of your cables. This case has 2 120mm fans pre-installed, 1 front intake and 1 rear exhaust. The NR400 with the optical disc drive in its stock configuration can support up to 4 120mm fans. That is 2 120mm fans at the front, with one 120mm fan along the top and one at the rear. Or you can have up to 3 140mm and one 120mm fan. That's 2 140mm fans at the front, with one 140mm fan along the top and one 120mm at the rear. Radiator support in its stock configuration allows for up to a 240mm radiator at the front and up to a 140mm radiator along the top and a 120mm radiator at the rear. Now if you remove the optical disc drive bay, then you can have 2 120mm or 2 140mm fans along the top, as well as their respective radiators, but you still cannot fit 3 120mm fans at the front. The chassis just doesn't have the tooling for it. Now you might be able to fit a 280mm radiator at the front. I say might because there is a bent piece of metal that might interfere with the top of the radiator. Well, I think that's it for the overview. I guess it's time to get on to the testing. Now before I get onto the charts, if you do want to know more about my case testing methods, you can check the card up here or the link in the description below, and that should answer most of your questions on how I test the cases. Not really sure what else to say other than that, so let's get on to the charts. Now again, just as a reminder, everything is in Celsius and shown as a delta T. The NR400 in its stock configuration had a max CPU temperature of just over 51.5 degrees, with its average temperature at 48 degrees. The NR400 in the fan normalized tests had a max temperature of just about 48.9 degrees, with the average temperature almost being 46.5. The NR400 with the stock fans with one added top exhaust fan had a max CPU temperature of 48.75 degrees, with the average temperature being 46.8. The NR400 in the stock configuration with no front panel or filters had a max CPU temperature of 48.5 degrees, with the average temperature being 46.35. Now with the fan normalized tests with no front panel and no top filter, had a max CPU temperature of 46.4 degrees and had an average of 43.7. With all the cases that I have tested so far, the NR400 in its stock configuration had the best stock CPU temperatures and had the best overall temperature with the fan normalized tests with no front panel and no filters, narrowly beating out the Meshify C. Now for the GPU temperatures, these ones aren't as promising, and I'll discuss why in a bit. In its stock configuration, the NR400 had a max GPU temperature of 64 degrees. Again, this is Celsius, shown as a delta T, and had an average temperature of 59. In its stock configuration with no front panel or filters, again had a max GPU temperature of 64, with an average temperature of 57.5. Now adding one exhaust fan helped the GPU temperature drop by 1.5 degrees to 62.5, with the average temperature pretty much staying the same at 57. Now for the fan normalized tests, had a max GPU temperature of 57, which is a 5.5 degree drop, and had the average temperature at 50.85. So much improved with the fan normalized tests. Now in the fan normalized tests with no front panel or filters, the max GPU temperature dropped down to 51 degrees and had an average temperature of 47.5. Now the reason I think the temperatures are so high is because of the size of the case and the motherboard and combination with the video card. The motherboard I'm using, the ASRock B450M Pro 4, has the 16 times slot in the second slot location, which is then minimizing the amount of room that the video card has to breathe. And on top of that, the video card has its fin stack shooting the air out towards the front of the case, which it seems that the front fan is then pushing the hot air down, which is then just cycling the hot air back into the GPU. A way I think this could be fixed is by adding some slats or some honeycomb pattern to the top of the shroud, which then should hopefully help the GPU pull more air, bringing down the temperatures. As you can see, in comparison with these ATX cases, the NR400 does not perform very well in the GPU portion of the testing. The NR400 falls just short of the Meshify C in the fan normalized testing. Now overall, I really like this case. The price of $60 USD is really good for the build quality that you're getting. I think this case looks freaking fantastic. Now fair enough, I don't specifically like the optical disc drive bay, but they have an option without that. It's just finding them is very difficult as far as I can tell. I don't know if they're just selling out or if they just don't have that many, or if it's something about region. That's a little strange, but I have seen them for sale. They're just typically by third-party resellers on Amazon or Newegg, and they're just jacked prices. So just don't pay idiotic prices for these things, because that's just, please don't. The metal mesh, or the fine metal mesh, works really well. It's like with the fan normalized tests, the system performed pretty well, especially in the CPU. Not so much in the GPU, but again, as I said, that is heavily based off of my system and how I have it set up, or how I want it set up for these tests. Another great thing is the amount of storage you can get in this thing. Even in the non-optical disc drive option, you can still get 3 3.5-inch drives and 4 2.5-inch drives. On top of any NVMe drives, or M.2 drives rather, you can get a lot of storage in this tiny little case, and that, having the option of doing that, is awesome. Cable management is really easy with that 22 millimeters along the back side. Means you can just really kind of shove things in there and put on the case, or you have room to actually really nicely lay things out. The only real issue I have with this case is the GPU temperatures. Now I do think having a honeycomb pattern or some slats in the top of the shroud should definitely help with those temperatures, but they're not there, so that is a bit of an issue. So yeah, I guess that's my thoughts on the NR400. I really want to take a look at the NR600 after testing with this, just seeing if having that extra space makes that much of a difference, or will make a difference. So that should be really, really interesting. I'm just hoping I can actually find one, because stock right now of things is whacked, thanks to this whole human malware thing. Well, that's all I have for this one. All the normal stuff. If you like the video, you know what to do. Subscribe, click that bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. And as always, thank you for watching, and see you next time.